Hey guys, so today we have another 2020 election prediction between Senator Bernie Sanders from the great state of Vermont and Mr. President Donald Trump from the state of New York. So, starting off with the safe states, while I'm trying to knock off a lot of videos today, so my voice quite dry, so apologies for that if some words might not quite come out the way I want them to come out. So, starting off with Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, New York, Vermont. I actually see most of Maine except for that second district now moving into the safe column along with the state of New Mexico. So, we start off 190 electoral votes for Mr. Sanders. Where can Trump make it up? He can make it up in safe Republican states. So Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, most of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So this has been quite generous to Mr. Sanders. There's a lot of likely Republican states in this batch that would get more competitive with someone like a Sanders, but still probably aren't going to go for a Democrat, especially someone like a Bernie Sanders. So these are states like Alaska, states like Montana, states like Texas, states like Missouri, states like Indiana. These states are probably not flipping, but I see being within 15% because of the candidate on the Democratic side being very popular, especially compared to other Democrats in these rural states. Still unpopular in these rural states, but less unpopular than other establishment Democrats would do. Even some people who kind of are an establishment Democrat and are progressive people, and I'm referring to Elizabeth Warren. So we start off 190 electoral votes for Mr. Sanders, 163 for Mr. Trump. States like Virginia, states like Colorado, if we're being completely honest, these are likely to go over to the Democrats. Both of these states have been trending Democratic. They're both likely to go to the Democrats in the next presidential election. So these two states definitely probably going to go towards Mr. Sanders and the Democrats. Two districts I want to cover. Two districts. State of Maine, that second district, I see actually very tightly going towards Bernie Sanders. He can appeal to Maine voters far better than Hillary Clinton could, coming from New York. In addition, I see him carrying the Omaha city and its suburbs being Nebraska's second district. I see that one narrowly going. Again, both these districts are very narrow victories for Mr. Sanders. So we have 214 electoral votes for Mr. Sanders, 163 for Mr. President Donald Trump. So where can Trump try and make up some of this lead? He can make it up in states like Georgia. Georgia has been a traditionally Republican state, and Bernie Sanders really isn't the kind of person to appeal to these African American voters. Another area where Mr. Trump could narrowly win, that's in the state of Iowa. Iowa is again kind of a swing state that has been trending Republican in recent years and definitely could be considered a leaning Republican state at this point in time. But that's kind of where the bright spots end for Mr. Trump. If we go ahead and move most of these states into the leaning Democratic column, because they are definitely leaning Democratic. States like Nevada that have been trending Democratic and will definitely go for someone like, let's just turn the brightness down a bit, definitely go for someone like a Bernie Sanders. State of Arizona, I see that one being very tight. I'm putting it in the pure toss-up column. Pure toss-up column in the state of Arizona. That's not where Mr. Trump wants things to be in the state of Arizona. He needs to win Arizona in order to win the presidency, pretty much. A state where I think would be very close, the state of Florida. I see Florida being unbelievably tough. I'm putting it in the pure toss-up column. And I see Mr. Mr. Trump or Mr. Sanders edging out a narrow victory, it'll basically come down to which side can get independent voters, but more importantly, which side can get their own party's base out to vote. And both these candidates do a very good job of that. Mr. Sanders, he gets out the Democratic base in droves. Mr. Trump, he gets out the Republican base in droves. And again, it'll also come down to who can win those independent voters. And that's probably the area where Mr. Trump could struggle in. But again, Florida. It could go either way. We know something about Florida, right? Another state that's going to be unbelievably tight. North Carolina. I see this one very slightly going towards the president. Now, reasoning behind this, it's traditionally a Republican state. Like Georgia, Mr. Sanders probably isn't the candidate to energize African American voters. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't see North Carolina going towards someone like a Mr. Sanders. Next up, we have the state of New Hampshire. This is pretty much a done deal at this point. He's incredibly popular in New Hampshire. He overwhelmingly won the Democratic primary in New Hampshire against Clinton in 2016. There's a lot of love for him in the state of New Hampshire, and I see New Hampshire going into the likely Democratic column. This could surprise some people. 2 states are moving into the likely Democratic column. Michigan, I see moving into the likely Democratic column. Minnesota, I see moving into the likely Democratic column. Reasoning behind this, these states are going to be close. But I just can't see Mr. Trump winning here against someone like a Sanders. He's perceived as a working class hero, and that's something that he's going to use to his advantage in these Rust Belt states. 2 more states I see leaning towards Mr. Sanders, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. These, again, pretty much going to go to Mr. Sanders at this point in time, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. And then in the state of Ohio, I see that one being too close to call and it being a pure toss-up state. So we end with 280 electoral votes for Mr. Sanders, 200 electoral votes for Mr. Trump. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down your suggestions below, and I'll see you all in the next one.